Just a few years ago, Gina Loudon was a young, impressionable college student on her way to becoming the pride of her progressive college professors. Late one night, away from the supervision of the college faculty, in a freak accident, she was exposed to an overdose of common-sense conservatism. Since then, she has spent every waking moment unlearning everything she was programmed to believe during her college indoctrination. Join her in her re-education. This is the Dr. Gina Show.
You're coming into my house?
So y'all need to hide your kids, hide your wife.
Go get a real job.
Three-letter word, jobs. J-O-B-S.
The president and the first lady are kind of like the mom and the dad of the country. And when your dad says something, you listen.
They don't get a pass because they're young and stupid.
16 ounces is the maximum that they would be able to serve in one cup. If you want to order 2 cups at the same time, that's fine. It's your choice.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Where do they come up with this stuff?
This is the Dr. Gina Show.
Welcome, welcome. Welcome to the Dr. Gina Show. It's good to be with you. Got a great show in store. Of course, the news is breaking so fast that, like, I've done nothing but write for the last 24 hours. Little sleep, little folding of the hands, a little writing. That's pretty much all I've done. I did manage to run over to the local San Diego station and make a news appearance on KUSI. Thanks to the good folks there for having me on this morning. Talking about this whole IRS thing. The implications abound. It's truly astonishing when you really start to think about what is going on here and the implications long term. Everyone should be upset about this. But it's Theo Thursday here on the Dr. Gina Show, where we come back to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter isn't about the IRS. I know we have answers for that. We're going to talk about some of those today. The heart of the matter isn't the IRS. The heart of the matter isn't Obama being gone. The heart of the matter is truly all about an intelligent designer who has a plan and who has perfect judgment and who knows precisely what's going to happen, not just in the next days, but in the next weeks and months and years and through eternity. And that is our focus today. It is Theological Thursday here on the Dr. Gina Show, and we are going to bring you today, at your request, per your request, some clips from the George Washington, a Man of Prayer event that you know took place last week. And it was an honor for my daughter Lyda and I to get to co-MC an event in Statuary Hall, only the second one in 100 years, to commemorate George Washington putting that first cornerstone there in Statuary Hall. An amazing event. And big thank you goes out to Dan Cummins and also my own pastor, Jim Garlow, for making all of that happen. So we're going to bring you the clips. We're going to have greats, people that you love, words of theirs you won't hear anywhere else, despite their iconicness. Eric Metaxas, Newt Gingrich, Lila Rose from Live Action Network, and J.C. Watts.
Yeah, because this was a closed event.
It was a closed event.
Only congressmen got to see these awesome speeches.
That's right, and little guys like me. And so anyway, so you will get to hear from those folks. And also today on the show, we have Billy Hallowell today, don't we, Producer Jason?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, love me some Billy Hallowell. Got him on, you know, he's faith editor for theblaze.com. You can find him on Twitter at Billy Hallowell and at The Blaze, of course. And he is going to give us our week's wrap in Faith Matters. And I can't even imagine what all he's going to talk about today, because there is so much news popping. Christian Coalition added their name today to the organizations that has been harassed by the IRS. It looks like it goes way beyond the original scopes defined by this administration, saying patriot groups, Tea Party groups. goes way beyond that. This goes to faith groups. This goes to groups like our guest Thomas Schmitz, who we had on yesterday, who is with American Grizzlies United, who also has been harassed by the IRS. And there are two groups missing. Two groups missing from all this. And producer Jason actually pointed this out to me before I went on KUSI this morning. Two groups missing. Two groups we haven't heard from. One is conservative groups who have not been harassed. Where are they? The other is non-conservative groups. Let's say progressive political action groups that have been harassed. Where are they? So we're going to keep asking those kinds of questions. If you saw the press conference this morning, more than 250 patriot organizations have come forward saying they've been harassed by the IRS. Let me ask you a question. What if 50 of those had been more effective in the last presidential election? Could it have turned it? Let me ask you something. What if 50 of those, just 50 out of the 250 that have been, their free speech has been suppressed and harassed? What if 100 of those groups had been able to take part in their local politics or in their state politics or in a congressional race? What would be different? How is this not criminal? There's no way. And before leftist groups gloat over the abuse of power here, progressives better think about this. The American personality, the American fabric, the American psyche knows this now. And if they put a conservative in and nobody's been prosecuted for this, then it simply means that the next bureaucrat that comes along that takes a job with one of these bureaucracies where they know their job is sometimes to exert and abuse the power they've been given by an administration, you could be next. Remember the old, first they came for the Jews, but I wasn't a Jew, so I wasn't afraid, and then they came for, and then finally, ultimately, they came for me. And there was nobody left to defend me. That is the risk they take. That is the risk they take. And I think a lot of liberals get that. I heard this morning from my agent, who happens to be a liberal, and I heard from him this morning, and he said, this is wrong. This is sickening. I think a lot of liberals, the honest ones, they understand what we're talking about here. They understand what a severe implication this has on free speech and many other things, frankly, in America. So we're going to be talking about that. Also, I'm doing some exposing on this abortion case out of Texas, this doctor that we talked about yesterday, just a little bit, just briefly touched on it. I did a lot of research, a lot of investigation on that topic yesterday afternoon, and I'm going to share with you things I heard, conversations I had directly with the county attorney general's office and also with the state attorney general and also with the Texas Medical Board. This is only going to get more interesting. The Gosnell case, whether we like it or not, was not isolated. And in some opinions, this is much, much worse, in my opinion as well. We're talking about a doctor who was willing to twist the heads off of babies, have them delivered in toilets and hallways, and thrown away in trash bags, alive in some cases. Many cases. This isn't isolated. They said they did up to 10 of these a day, these live births. Sickening, excruciating to listen to look at. I had producer Jason editing a piece I was working on last night, and he said, I can't do this. I can't see the screen through the tears. That's how excruciating this is. And I don't know about you, but I plan to keep fighting and plan to keep exposing this huge lie of abortion that hurts not just babies, but also women and children and families and lives. And one of the best answers to that is adoption. And I, as an adoptive mom, can tell you it's one of the very best answers. So those are some of the things we're going to get to this Theological Thursday. Billy Hallowell coming up. Also, you are going to get to hear the private speeches in the private Statuary Hall event that no one else at least not many people, have had access to, of Eric Metaxas, Newt Gingrich, Lila Rose, and J.C. Watts. So you're going to want to stay tuned this Theological Thursday here on the Dr. Gina Show.
Would you rather be a gun owner or a victim? Hi, I'm Tim Macy from Gun Owners of America. Our Constitution affirms our right to self-defense, including the right to own firearms. Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who'd like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was formed over 35 years ago. We're here for only two reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. I urge you to join us in this fight. We've been called the only no-compromise pro-gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Please go to gunowners.org and join today. It may help you from becoming a victim tomorrow. That's gunowners.org.
God, guns, and gear, the things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best t-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com, docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear.
I'll pick you up after school. Okay, I got it.
It's easy to take a day for granted. You and your family are connected by routine, and you stick to it. But what if a disaster strikes without warning? What if life as you know it has completely turned on its head? What if your day's routine is disrupted and you can't reach your family? Have you planned for that? Before a disaster turns your family's world upside down, it's up to you to be ready. Get a kit, make a plan, be informed. Today, learn how at www.ready.gov. Ready.gov. This message brought to you by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Ad Council.
Do you support Obama's universal background check? This is Dr. Gina. I want you to go to gunowners.org right now and answer that important survey question. Gun Owners is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, according to Ron Paul, and many others are finding the value of joining an organization like Gun Owners of America, who's been there and will be there with a no-compromise attitude. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org.
You're a troublemaker, troublemaker. You ain't nothing but a troublemaker, girl.
This is Andrew Breitbart of Breitbart.com and Big Government. Troublemaker, just like my longtime friend, Dr. Gina, Tea Party Patriot. You're listening to the Dr. Gina Show.
Oh, troublemaker, yeah, that's your middle name. Oh, I know you know it, but you're stuck in my brain. Troublemaker.
And you are listening to the Dr. Gina Show. Thanks so much for being with us. Per your request, we are bringing you the private speeches from Statuary Hall. You won't hear them anyplace else. That took place at the George Washington Man of Prayer event, only the second time in 100 years there's been an event like this in Statuary Hall. And one of my favorite authors, I've brought him to you before, one of my favorite authors, one who just is legendary, really, in his writing Amazing Grace, and also writing Bonhoeffer, of course, Amazing Grace being the story of William Wilberforce. And he has a new book called Seven. I think it's called Seven Men, actually. Anyway, had a great time visiting with him after the event that you're getting ready to hear his speech from. I know that was improper grammar. Leave me alone for it. And got to sit by him at dinner and really enjoyed his company. This man is as humble and as real. Could not wait to get home to his wife and children. And he took time out of his very busy life to come and be a part of this amazing landmark event. And without any further ado, Eric Metaxas. I'm also excited to introduce to you tonight one of my favorite authors. In fact, I believe he's the only author I had on my show both before I read his book and then again after I read his book, because I thought it was that amazing. I want to introduce the author of New York Times best-selling books, Bonhoeffer and Amazing Grace, Eric Metaxas.
Thank you, Gina. Well, it's pretty humbling to stand here in this tremendously august chamber. It's even more humbling to follow Speaker Gingrich, and whoever planned this. I just want to say, I'll forgive you eventually, but very tough. Why are we here? Well, my story, the story of so many Americans, my parents came from Europe, from Greece and Germany respectively. I grew up in the 60s and the 70s really, was educated in a good public school in Danbury, Connecticut in the 70s. But what's interesting to me is that my generation and all the generations subsequently didn't learn some of the things that you really need to know to be an American. It seems clear to me that my generation was never told that George Washington was a great man. We all knew he was a sort of a cartoon figure, larger than life figure, somehow figured into President's Day car sales. But to really know who he was and to know the stories that Speaker Gingrich just shared with us, it seems to me that every generation of Americans must know those stories. There's something scandalous in not knowing those stories because those things actually happened. And we ought to know that logic would lead us to think that Providence somehow had a hand in our founding. You can't prove it, but when you hear those stories one after the other and then so many others, it leads you to believe that somehow there's something more than just a continent and some people. There's something special here. I'm not here to plug a book. That would be unseemly in a venue like this, and I didn't even bring a copy, just so you understand. But I've just come out with a book called 7 Men because I think there's a crisis of manhood in the culture and we need to raise up heroes for our young people. And I certainly didn't plan any of this, but the book just came out, and the first man in this book, without a doubt, is George Washington. And I was ashamed as I studied the story of Washington to realize how little I actually knew of the greatness of this man. And I was ashamed really for my generation to think that people my age and younger hardly know, unless they're homeschooled probably, that this man in his very person somehow symbolized the self-restraint that is at the heart of self-government, that he eschewed power. Some of you know the famous story. He was offered in 1783 to be King George I of America, and he deserved it. He actually did deserve it. It wasn't something unseemly, but it was unseemly to him. He was offended that he could fight for these noble ideas for so long, and that people would suggest that because Congress didn't have the money to pay the officers and the troops who'd served, that somehow they ought to turn their backs on the whole thing and take what they can get. He was offended. And so he did the thing that almost no one does. He gave up virtually unlimited power for no reason other than that he thought it was the right thing to do. His restraint is legendary, remarkable. And it's because of that sacrifice that he made that we're essentially here. I think those of us who know the story realize that he, as a human being, was given a task which is much larger than life, to do what he did, and that he appropriately is called the father of our country. It had to do with his character. But as I say, since the 60s, in my generation, we've sneered at things like character. We sneer at corny paintings like this. We don't really go for realism so much anymore, or corny things like prayer, or God, or providence, or heroes. Heroes have fallen out of favor. We look for the worm in every apple, for the steroid in the slugger and the sprinter. We don't really take that seriously, that there could be anyone, men especially, who might be great and worthy of our emulation. Understood the story, remembered the story of Nathan Hale. These are the songs and the poems and the stories that we told ourselves. They weren't fictional, by the way, they were true, but we told ourselves these stories because there was something larger than simply a country and some legislation and a budget. We understood that there were ideas at the very heart of who we were, and those ideas were important, and they were fragile, and that our freedom was fragile. I read a book recently by a dear friend of mine, Oz Guinness. Some of you know him. He wrote a book called A Free People's Suicide, The Sustainability of Freedom in America's Future. And in that book, as I read it, I was again ashamed, because I said, how is it that a Briton comes to teach me about what I ought to have known since the 5th grade? He talked about the ordered freedom, how fragile it was, how when Franklin says to the woman outside Independence Hall, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it," he meant that, if you can keep it, that it's something that needs to be kept. It's like a fragile plant, a glorious, inestimably valuable plant that needs to be taken care of. And if you don't take care of it, it will die. And I really think that, as I say in my generation, once you cease to understand how fragile it is and what it is, and that people died for it, we will cease to be America unless we know that. Oz Guinness in the book talks about the golden triangle of freedom, which the founders thought as central to this American experiment. This idea that freedom requires virtue. We understand that. Freedom requires self-restraint, self-government. That's freedom. So we have to govern ourselves. So it requires virtue and character. We don't talk about that very much, obviously, anymore. It's all about being a technocrat or a bureaucrat or somebody who's really, really smart and your character doesn't matter so much. Well, not according to the founders. According to the founders, the very idea was that you could not have freedom without virtue. And then, of course, you could not have virtue without faith. Because where do you get virtue? Why do you do what you do? Why did Washington do what he did, giving up this tremendous power, giving up a 3rd term? Why would he do that? Because he thought it was right. And what does that even mean? Because he believed in some larger order. And that if you go along with that larger order, you will be blessed. And we're talking about him and celebrating here because he understood that. Well, freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith, and then faith in turn requires freedom. This is the golden triangle of which the founders spoke. And the idea is that faith requiring freedom is the piece that we're beginning to miss. I want to say that what all the founders understood was that this idea of religious liberty was at the very heart of the American experiment, and that if you don't have a free market of ideas, of religious ideas, the whole thing comes apart. Once religious freedom begins to be threatened, we're in trouble. And religious freedom is right now being threatened. The HHS mandate, the legal redefinition of marriage are ultimately not about contraception and sexuality. Mainly, these are issues of religious freedom. And nobody seems to be talking about this anywhere on any of the news networks. And this is at the very heart of freedom in America. It's being threatened. To have religious freedom threatened in America, it's no different than having the free market threatened. We understand that if we become, if our economy slows to the point that we become a European socialist state, we understand that we can no longer really be America. We can be America in name only. But similarly, if we lose religious freedom, if a secular orthodoxy rises and begins to force people of faith to keep their faith in the shadows, just in that building on Sunday morning, but once you come out, you have to bow to the secular orthodoxy. Once that happens, you understand that we can no longer be America. The America bequeathed to us by the founders is an America where we have that kind of religious freedom and where you're able to exercise your religious freedom. Hearing the prayers of George Washington read here by this delightful little girl, you almost want to say, didn't Washington know about the separation of church and state? What's he thinking? You know, of course, he died before Jefferson wrote the letter to the Danbury Baptists, so how could he possibly know about it? But think about that. Think about that. This was normative. And I will simply close by saying that robust faith is normative for America. It doesn't mean that everyone must have faith, but if we do not have robust expressions of faith and the great freedom, as Washington did, to feel no fear as being the person that he was, no fear of expressing his faith, we mustn't do that. To know that not only ought you feel free to do that, you ought to do that. Without that kind of faith, you cannot have the virtue and the self-government and the self-restraint that will give us great men and women and that will give us the nation which we are so honored to live in these days. So let me say that religious freedom is at the heart of America, and I'm just so honored to be here this evening in this tremendous place. The Lord bless you.
God, guns, and gear. The things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best t-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. DocGTV.com, DocGTV.com. Go there for your Patriot gear. You understand your Second Amendment freedoms, but who is out there with a no-compromise attitude that will defend those Second Amendment rights? Well, I can tell you, gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org. This is Dr. Gina, and I want you to go to that website right now, gunowners.org, and let them know that you want to help them as they continue the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, D.C., according to Ron Paul. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org. Check them out.
Hi, this is Craig Smith, chairman of Swiss America. Dr. Gina is the gold standard of talk radio.
What you waiting for?
Welcome back. You are listening to the Dr. Gina Show with your exclusive listening and viewing privilege to see and hear the speeches that took place last week in our nation's capital, in Statuary Hall, at the Washington Man of Prayer event. Next up is Newt Gingrich, and I have to tell you, this is one of the most powerful speeches you will ever hear. Stay tuned.
Is certainly no stranger to this hall, but he is back here today in a different capacity this time as the author of Valley Forge, George Washington, and a Crucible of Victory. His knowledge as well on American history is surpassed really by few in this country today. It is an honor to have him here today to help us remember and celebrate President George Washington. Please welcome former Speaker.
It's a real honor to be here. It's particularly an honor to be here at an event which has been dedicated to Carol, because Carol was such a remarkable person. Her fight against showed so much courage, and she and Jim were such enormous role models for all of us. I want to thank those of you who decided to dedicate tonight specifically to that. I'm here, frankly. Because Jim several weeks ago had asked me to come and find a very arbitrary ground to live like JC was. Some people have been that and just can't quite figure out where the word no went in their vocabulary. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about Washington, and I think it's interesting in terms of the rise of secularism in this country, that there has been an effort to, in a sense, take religion out of Washington. just as it was an effort to take religion out of Jefferson. And I liked what Louis Gohmert had done earlier, and I thought he did a good job of beginning to bring it back to what this country really was like and what the founding fathers were all about and how it worked. But let me just talk about the Washington part of it. This is a man who, as president, talks about the importance of recognizing God in his first inaugural address, that our rights have come because of God. Talks about the importance of God in his farewell address. Talks about God in his first term when he becomes the first president to issue a call for a national day of Thanksgiving. And in each of those cases, he says basically, look, we wouldn't be a free country. Now, you can have all sorts of modern secular academics who would argue that Washington was wrong, but you have to assume that as a guy who was at the Continental Congress, led the Army for 8 years, he had some reasonable knowledge of why he thought that. Now, I'm going to just give you 3 quick Washington stories, but they give you a flavor of how profound and how deep his sense of providence was. In the French and Indian Wars, as a very young man, he becomes the chief colonial aide to General Braddock, who leads the British expedition west towards what is now Pittsburgh. And Braddock's forces encounter the French and the Indians. And Braddock is shot, and the entire force is in danger of disintegrating. And Washington is a key person holding them together. Now remember, Washington, for his generation, is physically large. He's about 6'2", at a time when the average male is 5'6". If you portrayed Washington in a modern movie, he would be an NFL offensive lineman. A very big man. And he also rode big horses. And he was considered the best horseman in the colonies. So during the day, as he is saving the forces, he has 2 horses shot from under him, and he has 4 bullet holes in his coat. About 10 years later, he is at a powwow that includes a chieftain who had been on the other side. And the chief says to him, God clearly intends for you to play a major role. And Washington says, well, why are you saying that? He said, you were so big and were so visible. All of us were shooting at you. He said, I personally shot at you 13 times. And for some reason, we couldn't hit you. Now, put that in the back of your head when you think about Washington as he's called by his colleagues in the Congress to go to Boston to take over the Army and to become commander of all American forces. There's a quiet sense of certainty. So now he ends up in Brooklyn. And the American Army, about 30,000 men, is cut off because it can't cross the East River because the Royal Navy is sitting there. And the British have landed a large professional army in Long Island and are marching to destroy the American Army, which is clearly incapable of fighting. In the midst of this is the crisis. This is now only September of 1776. We issued the Declaration of Independence in July. And here we are in September, and we're about to be crushed. And all of a sudden, an enormous fog rolls in. And you can't see more than 100 feet. And the Americans gather up every rowboat they can find. And they literally row the army across the East River, past the Royal Navy, sometimes within 100 feet of it. I mean, there were times when they could see the ships in the fog and hope that the ships couldn't see them. And of course, they were in tiny rowboats at a pretty low level, and they didn't get seen. When the fog lifted the next day, there were a handful of Americans left on the Brooklyn side. This enormous British army collided with nothing. And Washington had saved the army, and it was sitting in Manhattan. Now, in any biblical account, there would have been zero doubt where the fog came from. And when you read Washington's writing, he says anybody who thinks that we were saved by anything but an act of providence completely misunderstands how desperate we were and how utterly unlikely it was to have this fall that dense that day at that particular moment. By that fall, and if you haven't been to the extraordinary education center at Mount Vernon, I beg you at some point to go to it, because they have a film that is brilliant on this moment. By the week of Christmas, 1776, the Army has basically collapsed. It's dropped from 30,000 men in Brooklyn to about 2,500 left who are effective and another 2,500 who are too sick to do anything. And of the people who are left, a very substantial number are going to have their term of service expire in January. And Washington calls his generals together. And he says, look, we have to win a victory. If we don't win a victory, this army is going to melt away. And so what I'm proposing is that we will cross the ice-bound Delaware River at night in 3 different places and surprise the professional German soldiers in Trenton and capture them, and that'll win a great victory, and people will be excited and we'll get volunteers. Well, his generals are all being rational, and they're saying, wait, you're going to cross 3 different places on an icy river in the middle of the night. The main force which you're going to lead is going to have to march 9 miles on a dirt road. And Washington says, and in the Mount Vernon version, they're going back and forth between Washington having all these bullets fired at him with Braddock and this moment of crisis. And Washington basically says, look, if we don't do something, the army disappears. When the army disappears, the revolution's over. When the revolution's over, they're going to hang all of us. So we have nothing to lose. So he insists they cross. Now, when they cross, they are so serious that their password that night is victory or death. And they mean it. As they're getting in the boats, Washington has his officers reading The Crisis by Thomas Paine, which he has asked Paine to write. And it begins, these are the times that try men's souls, and talks about summer soldiers, and about how defeating tyranny is hard. They march 9 miles. It turns out there are 2 ravines. They knew of one. There are 2. They are 4 hours behind schedule. There is an enormous snowstorm, but it's coming from the north, so it's at their back because they're marching south. They're 4 hours late. If you ever played this as a game on a board, the German soldiers, who were solid professionals, would have been out, been ready, and frankly would have slaughtered the Americans. Instead, the Germans have looked out the window and seen this enormous snowstorm. No, they're Europeans. And they say, no army can march in this kind of snow, because a European army was made of people who didn't want to be there. And you couldn't put them someplace where you couldn't watch them or they'd leave. And so European armies had to fight in relatively clear weather so they could watch them, so they could shoot them if they tried to leave. And so the Germans issue the orders, relax, you might as well rest for a while, nothing's going to happen. And so the Americans arrive 4 hours late with the Germans still in the various houses that they were staying in. The Americans dominate every street in Trenton, which is a very tiny town back then. The Germans suddenly figure out the Americans are here and they can't do it. They cannot get out of the houses to get organized. 800 German soldiers surrender at the price of 1 American. And Washington grabs him, runs for the river, gets across the river before the British Army can catch him. In 2 weeks, there are 15,000 volunteers, because victory leads people to show up. And they drive the British across New Jersey. Now, here's the thing to remember in Washington's mind. He didn't cleverly plan that. He was desperate that night. It took longer to cross the river than he thought it would. 2 of the 3 columns don't make it. He's all by himself. The march is 4 hours longer than he thought it would be. And they still won. Now, that's why he thought Providence had his hand in it. Because every time Washington turned around, something magical happened. This is a man who spent 8 years in the field with 1 week at Valley Forge. At Mount Vernon. 8 years with 1 week at home. And when he said, without Providence's intervention, we would not have become a country. Despite all the modern secular intellectuals, what he meant was, without God's intervention, we would not have become a country. And that's why almost all the founding fathers believed we should pray to God, believed that we should trust in God, believed that our rights came from our Creator. These weren't words. These were the deepest, heartfelt beliefs of people who had taken on the greatest empire in the world. And so I just would like to ask you just for a minute to say a silent prayer on behalf of Carol and Jen, and to say a silent prayer on behalf of General Washington and Martha, who suffered all through this period with her husband. And then to remember that we here in America today need the divine hand of God as much fully as we did at any point in the Revolutionary War. So, I just want you in your heart to go to God for that. Amen.
Ranger Station.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to report a bear sighting in the forest. 1 second, I'm having a smoke. Next thing I know, I'm face to face with Smokey Bear. Wow. And he told me it only takes 1 spark to start a wildfire.
Did you know 9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by humans?
I had no idea.
That's why Smokey's famous and you're not. If you see someone in danger of starting a wildfire, step in and make a difference. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council. Learn more at SmokeyBear.com.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
God, guns, and gear. The things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best t-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com, docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear.
Would you rather be a gun owner or a victim? Hi, I'm Tim Macy from Gun Owners of America. Our Constitution affirms our right to self-defense, including the right to own firearms. Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who would like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was formed over 35 years ago. We're here for only 2 reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. I urge you to join us in this fight. We've been called the only no-compromise pro-gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Please go to gunowners.org and join today. It may help you from becoming a victim tomorrow. That's gunowners.org.
Hey, it's Dr. Gina here, and I told you that I'm going to help you be the most effective in your activism that I possibly can, and I've got a tip for you right now. Go to gunowners.org and join to be a member. Sign up for their alerts, and you can know exactly what you need to do to take action to save your freedoms. Go there right now and become a member. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org. Tell them Dr. Gina sent you. Gunowners.org.
Hey, I heard you were a wild one. Ooh, hey, I heard you were a wild one. Show me how you do. I wanna show you down in the club with you. Hey, I heard you were a wild one. Ooh.
And you are listening to the Dr. Gina Show, where we are bringing you this Theological Thursday speeches. I don't think you'll hear anyplace else. They were made privately before members of Congress in Statuary Hall. And this Theo Thursday, we thought it appropriate to deliver on your request to hear some of those speeches that can't be found. You know they're not going to play in the mainstream media. You know C-SPAN's not picking them up, even though they should. I want to comment about Newt Gingrich, because I've seen him a lot publicly, met him a few times, never really seen his kind of behind the scenes as much. And I want to say about Newt Gingrich, interestingly, he sat in the very back of the statuary hall in a chair, not with the other congressmen and senators who were all in the front, as was I and my daughter and most everyone else who was in the program, but Newt sat in the back. And some of the congressmen, as they will do, my husband was a senator in Missouri, and I know that they are very busy, and they'll come and they'll go, and they'll commit to 3 things in the same hour because they're planning to make all 3, and they'll try. So some of the senators and congressmen left, you know, after they spoke, asked to speak at a certain time so they could leave. It's totally commonplace, so I'm not begrudging them that. But the interesting thing, understanding that he's not elected right now, but the interesting thing is that Newt Gingrich sat in the back of the room with everyone else, with the audience, by himself, the entire program. I watched him. I don't know why I watched him. He's a fascinating study to me because of my interest in psychology and, of course, his interesting background. So I watched him. And I just want to tell you, I was pretty impressed. Stayed all the way to the end, was there right at the beginning, listened to every speech, prayed through all the prayers. Interesting man. Up next, Lila Rose. You know her from Live Action Network. And in light of all the things going on with Gosnell and Carpin, you will not want to miss the wisdom from this woman who's been on the front lines long before it was cool to be there. Lila Rose, up next.
She is the founder of Live Action, a national pro-life group that I'm sure many of you know of. I'm absolutely honored and blessed to get to introduce the beautiful Lila Rose.
What an honor to be here tonight in this special moment when we're recognizing at the very heart of our nation's capital, the very heart of our nation, where we're recognizing our sovereign God and remembering that this country was founded on a commitment to Him, founded on a commitment to His image imprinted in each one of us, founded on a commitment to the weakest, to the strongest, to all of us, made in the image and likeness of God, so that men could flourish, women could flourish, so that we could enjoy the beauty, the beautiful life that God has given each one of us as a gift from Him. I'm representing many other voices, a generation that is hungry for more, because we have seen so much devastation in the last 30, 40, 50 years in our country, even before I was born, in turning upside down many of the things that this country was founded upon. And the Declaration of Independence, which was not signed by General George Washington because he was a general out fighting and defending those very rights that were marked out in the Declaration, risking his life and the life of his men. And in the Declaration of Independence, we have to remember it here and remind ourselves what it states, because it states that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are the rights that our general bravely was fighting for, and soon to be our president was bravely fighting for. These rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'm here to represent a generation that knows that there's something wrong with our country today. We have been so blessed as a nation, and I believe there's something so special about our country, and it's written in our founding documents, it's in our history, how we've overcome as a nation so many evils. We've overcome as a nation so many challenges, attacks on the human person, attacks on human rights, attacks on those fundamental freedoms, attacks on faith. And yet we're living in the midst, as many of you know, of many attacks on even the weakest among us, on that most fundamental right, the right to life, including for the weakest among us. And so I'm speaking here to call out to God, and together we're doing that tonight, to be grateful for the gifts we've been given, this great heritage founded on these human rights, and to ask Him to turn our hearts to be pure before Him, so that He can use His will can be done through us as they were done through our founding fathers, who prayed, who sought him, who humbled themselves and sought him and asked him to inspire their work and be behind them at every step of the way. And now we too can do the same thing. Because though the battle is not, a revolutionary war, there is still a battle going on, and it is a battle, I believe, for the soul of our country. And if we can respond now and respond with that urgency, recognizing that we are losing our littlest Americans every day by the thousands, we are losing some of our most fundamental moral and the morality and the religion that George Washington said we needed to protect in order to protect our nation, in order to have a strong foundation. So together, let's pray, and I pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all of the wonderful people here and for the members who are here, who are courageous in speaking their faith and courageous in following you and standing up for the fundamental rights that this country was founded to protect, and the weakest of our Americans that this country was founded to protect. And we praise you for leading us through so many great challenges in the past hundreds of years, these challenges that maybe hurt the weakest or hurt certain groups, or these challenges that were overcome because people called out your name and because we remembered what is true. We remembered our declaration. We remembered the most fundamental human rights, and that we're made in the image and likeness of God. And I pray that your Spirit descend upon this great Capitol building, that your Spirit descended upon this hall and all the members who come here, all of Capitol Hill, that your Spirit descend upon it and it touch hearts and it convict hearts. It touch the consciences that you give us as a gift to direct our wills. And we ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, because he came and he died and he laid down his life for us so that we could find salvation and we could live a life of freedom, freedom to choose the good and freedom to do what is right. And we ask that your Holy Spirit descend and it transform this country yet again, because this nation is special, and we praise you for the blessings we've been given, but transform it yet again, and that you continue to raise up leaders here on Capitol Hill, continue to raise them up and strengthen them, and give them every encouragement and every defense, so that they can speak your truth without fear, with courage, and so that they can be emboldened to follow you even in dark places where things may be dark and difficult, but follow you even when it invites suffering. And we commit ourselves again to pray for our leaders, whether we agree with them or not, but to pray for them that they listen to you and that your Holy Spirit, your most powerful and Holy Spirit, touch their hearts. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you.
Just a few years ago, Gina Loudon was a young, impressionable college student on her way to becoming the pride of her progressive college professors. Late one night, away from the supervision of the college faculty, in a freak accident, she was exposed to an overdose of common-sense conservatism. Since then, she has spent every waking moment unlearning everything she was programmed to believe during her college indoctrination. Join her in her re-education. This is the Dr. Gina Show.
You're coming into my house?
So y'all need to hide your kids, hide your wife.
Go get a real job.
Three-letter word. Jobs. Jobs.
The president and the first lady are kind of like the mom and the dad of the country. And when your dad says something, you listen.
They don't get a pass because they're young and stupid.
16 ounces is the maximum that they would be able to serve in one cup. If you want to order 2 cups at the same time, that's fine. It's your choice.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Where do they come up with this stuff?
This is the Dr. Gina Show.
It's a windy one here on the Dr. Gina Show today, but we are so glad to have you with us live at the beach. What an honor to be there in Statuary Hall and to get to hear these speeches, to get to introduce these amazing people alongside my little partner in crime, Lida Loudon, national founder of Tea Party Youth. She was my co-MC for the evening. And special thanks again to Dan Cummins of Real, and also to my own pastor, Jim Garlow, who invited me originally to do the emceeing for the evening. an amazing group of people, very impressive. So many others were there, and we'll bring you their speeches perhaps on a later date or post them at docgtv.com. But today, our final speech that we're going to bring to you this Theo Thursday is that of J.C. Watts. You know him, former congressman, tells the best head of lettuce joke I've ever heard in my life. I make him tell me again every time I see him. And he's another great in this whole political fight that we are in. And we're going to bring him to you. But before we do, I want to comment that after this, we've got some updates on the Texas abortion case that I've been talking about and talked to you briefly about yesterday. I've been writing about it. I've been investigating it. I'm going to bring you some updates on that story. Looks like there will be an investigation, and you heard it here probably first. And also going to talk to you about some breaking news regarding the IRS situation with conservative groups. And so you're going to want to stay tuned for that after the speech of the one and only, the crazy kind of fun guy, J.C. Watts.
Former Congressman J.C. Watts Jr. from Oklahoma, highly recognized, you'll remember, as a superb athlete at the University of Oklahoma, then went on to become an outstanding pastor and then a great congressman. Today, he is a ranch owner and businessman and a much sought after speaker. So we are honored to have him here with us today, J.C. Watts Jr.
Dr. Gina, thank you. I want to say to the members of Congress who are here, who've come, and who have left, my cap is off to the men and women that showed up here tonight, because I know what a commitment it was for you to be here, and a sacrifice, because there's 1,001 things that those members could have been doing, and they chose to spend a few minutes with us. And I wanted to say thank you. Thank you to Speaker Boehner for allowing this event to take place here this evening, and I am delighted that Pastor Dan and Pastor Garlow would think enough of me to extend an invitation for me to come and be with you tonight and to share in this special time. And I was looking so forward to seeing Jim and Carol, and I was telling Dan before it started, Carol Garlow surely had a special sauce when she prayed. And I was looking forward to that tonight, and she's in a much better place, as we know. In reading George Washington's prayer journal over the last week, Louis, I discovered and sensed that obviously all that we've read about him, all that we know about him, we know that he's a man of great strength and had awesome grit, but also a man of great humility. He prayed of thankfulness, he asked forgiveness, and you knew of his thankfulness for grace because he knew that God had shown so much of it toward him. We all can relate to that, no question. In his journal, there was an unspoken recurring theme, and it was, search my heart. Search my heart. That should be your prayer, and it should be my prayer, and it often is. Lord, search my heart. If there's anything in my heart, dear God, that's not of you, take it away from me. Take it away from me. My pride, my selfishness, search my heart in my giving. Search my heart for loving others. Lord, search my heart that I treat people the way you say to treat them. You see, in politics, the theory is not to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's usually do it to them before they do it to you. So, Lord, search my heart. Search my heart for forgiveness. Search my heart for pride. Take it away from me. You know, about 10 years ago, the Lord prompted my heart to go to a gentleman in Oklahoma that had been somewhat of a nemesis of mine and had made life miserable for me. And I'd gone back to the state agency, and the Lord prompted my heart to go to him and beg his forgiveness for the way I felt about it. So I went to this gentleman and I said, when I left, I did not have a Christian attitude about you. And the Lord's laid upon my heart to come to you and beg your forgiveness and ask you to forgive me for the way I felt about you when I left. 3 weeks later, he was back to his old tricks. And of course, my thing was go get the scripture and look and see if I can't find a loophole in this forgiveness thing. But you know what? I never did. There's not one. Friends, we surely need to be conscious of praying for our country and our nation and our world. But God would say to us, as I saw in the prayers of George Washington, J.C., I want you to make it personal. Pray about your forgiveness or your unforgiveness. Pray about your pride. Pray about your selfishness. Don't just pray for your kids, pray for other people's kids. Pray for other people's grandkids. God would want us, as George Washington did, to make it personal. Say, Lord, let it begin with me. To make my nation better, let it begin with me. And as God says in 2 Chronicles 7:14, and I'm going to read it the way my Bible reads it. If my people, which are called by my name, would humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven. I'll forgive their sin and heal their land. There's an old saying once that I heard from an elderly lady. She said that we don't think that prayer works. The question to her was why? She said, because if we did, we'd do it a whole lot more. Friends, this place that you and I call home, and the rest of the world calls America, it's a pretty special place. George Washington bowing on his knees to a true and living God. He knew the importance of that. We too must recognize that prayer is integral in sustaining the greatness of America. Thank you for letting me come.
Would you rather be a gun owner or a victim? Hi, I'm Tim Macy from Gun Owners of America. Our Constitution affirms our right to self-defense, including the right to own firearms. Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who'd like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was formed over 35 years ago. We're here for only two reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. I urge you to join us in this fight. We've been called the only no-compromise pro-gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Please go to gunowners.org and join today. It may help you from becoming a victim tomorrow. That's gunowners.org.
God, guns, and gear. The things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best t-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com, docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear.
Can you tell if these vegetables are being contaminated with bacteria that could cause paralysis? Listen. Can't, can you? You can't see it either. Use different cutting boards so that the bacteria in raw meats and seafood and their juices doesn't touch prep surfaces for other foods, like veggies. Raw food may contain bacteria that can make you very sick, or worse. 1 in 6 Americans will get sick from food poisoning this year, and roughly 3,000 will die. But you can keep your family safer by separating raw meats and seafood from other foods. Learn more about this and other important information. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov. That's foodsafety.gov. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
Do you support Obama's universal background check? This is Dr. Gina. I want you to go to gunowners.org right now and answer that important survey question. Gun Owners is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, according to Ron Paul, and many others are finding the value of joining an organization like Gun Owners of America, who's been there and will be there with a no-compromise attitude. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org.
My heart's a stereo. It beats for you, so listen close. Hear my thoughts in every note.
This is Dick Morris. If you're diagnosed with liberalism, Dr. Gina will cure you.
You feel low. This melody was meant for you. So sing along to my stereo. My heart's a stereo. It beats for you, so listen close.
And you are listening to the Dr. Gina Show, where it is very windy here, but beachy. You like beachy. It's good to be with you this Theo Thursday. Coming up, we do have Billy Hallowell coming up on the show to talk about this week in Faith Matters. I wouldn't know where to start on the attacks on our faith this week if I were Billy Hallowell. But he's going to come on and he's going to talk to us about what he does know. I went on KUSI this morning, which is a local San Diego TV station, to talk about the whole IRS situation. And there are a couple of red flags that I want you all to be aware of as this narrative continues, as we try to define the narrative for the public on our side of the aisle, and the progs on the other side of the aisle try to define it for theirs. And I will say, and I want to say this first, I know a lot of intellectually honest liberals who are appalled by what has happened with the IRS. So I want to put that out there first, because I think it's important to say that this is not every liberal out there. I know. I'm not gonna toy with you guys over labels. We're just gonna use the words liberal, prog, progressive, leftist, statist. We're gonna use them interchangeably because I want to. And so this is the spin that you need to be aware of. There's a difference. There's a difference between the 501c3 and the 501c4. I have already heard leftists circling the wagon and trying to say that 501c4 is somehow the same thing as a 501c3, that this is about greedy, conservative people trying to get tax deductions and trying to be able to use their money in ways that they shouldn't be able to because they shouldn't be able to talk about politics. Wrong. That's the definition of a 501c3. Look it up for yourself. Don't trust me. Just do that. Do your research, do your homework, and be able to talk intelligently on the subject of 501c3 versus 501c4. And then there are other organizations as well, 527s. That's what we talked with Thomas Schmitz from American Grizzlies United about here on the show yesterday. So there are other groups. Now this is what's happening on this IRS scandal. This is criminal. And the reason this is criminal is because this goes beyond just the harassment and inconvenience of a bunch of conservatives. If this is allowed to stand, and I'm sorry, one head rolling, Steve Miller, I think it is, the current standing in commissioner of the IRS, who wasn't even a permanent employee, as far as I can understand it, not sufficient. Not sufficient, Mr. Obama, not at all. And the reason it isn't sufficient that one head rolled, or even that a whole bunch of departments within the IRS's heads roll, is because if this is not criminally prosecuted, if people don't go to jail, as Boehner in one of his very finest moments ever said they should. He said, I'm not concerned with who's fired, I'm concerned with who goes to jail. We should all be concerned with who goes to jail. Because let's say in the next administration, let's just say Sarah Palin's elected. Let's just take that for a moment. Paint that picture for a lefty out there. Sarah Palin's elected and decides to become corrupt, which I don't think would happen, but let's just pretend for a moment that it did. And she decides, well, hey, you know, I need to make up for all of the things that Obama did in his last administration, giving such favor to liberals, and I need to make sure that conservatives stay in power. Do you have any idea how tempting that would be for a presidential candidate in their first term, no matter what party? And so I'm going to try to make up for that by doing the same thing in equal numbers to political organizers on the other side of the aisle. Just a little tit for tat, just a little fair is fair, right? I don't believe Sarah Palin would ever do that. But I'm just making the point to scare those who find this amusing, that conservatives have been through this hell and this harassment and this complete distraction from their political activism. It could be you next. Now let me ask you a question. 450 groups have come forward and said that they have been harassed by the IRS. And that's not even counting the groups who've been harassed by other agencies, because that's happening too. And you'll be hearing more about that right here on the Dr. Gina Show. But let's just take those 450, right? Groups of whatever, political activists who've been harassed by the IRS, 450. And let's say 50 of them were so frustrated and so overwhelmed with the paperwork and the threats from the IRS and other government agencies that they weren't as active in the last presidential election as they could have been. Let's say that those 50 activist groups acting upon their free speech with the time given back to them that this administration and the IRS took from them could have overturned the election. What if? 450 activist groups, that's a lot of grassroots. It's a lot of acorn, only these are volunteers who are usually taking time away from their work and their families to do their activism. So let's say 50 or 100, or what would you say, 200, 300, how many of those 450 groups that have now come forward, harassed over their 501c4s, had been more able, without the constraints of being harassed by the IRS, to participate in the election process? What if it had overturned the election? Do you understand why this is so criminal? Why this is about more than suppression of your First Amendment rights? Why this is actually about the complete withdrawal of your First Amendment rights if they can actually steal an election with these tactics? And that's not even to mention the groups who just gave up, who could never get their 501c4, could never get their 527, 501c3, whatever it was they were trying to get. They could never get it, so they just gave up. How many of those groups are out there? Now, there are two groups of people, very distinctly, that we have not heard from at all. The first group of people that we have not heard from, that I'd like to hear from, if you know some of them, send them to me. The first group of people are conservatives who've not been harassed. Find me a conservative group who has not been harassed by the IRS in some way, shape, or form. Find me one. Bring them on my show. I'll take them. The second group of people that we have not heard from are the progressive political action groups who have also been harassed and can prove it by the IRS. Show me them. Bring them to me. I'll do more than have them on my show. I'll write a whole article about them for a national publication. We'll get it everywhere we can because this is wrong, because this is criminally wrong, because this has to be prosecuted. Now, here's one other thing I want you to watch the media for, conservatives, because this is critical. I agree with Michelle Bachmann. I believe the reason the administration admitted to this is because they didn't believe it was impeachable. They know that Benghazi is impeachable. The wrongdoings committed there are impeachable. The right thing to happen at this moment is that there is such a public outcry from conservatives and liberals and First Amendment lovers of freedom in this country that this president must resign. Barring that, there is no forgiveness. Criminal prosecution and this president's resignation are the only fixes for this IRS situation. And then we get back to talking about Benghazi. Because Benghazi, we know, is impeachable. They want to distract us with this IRS thing. That's what this is, and I believe it. And you better know it too. All right, when we come back, our updates in science and technology. Also, Billy Hallowell from The Blaze coming up here real soon. So you're going to want to stay tuned for all of that. It is Theo Thursday, This Week in Review in Faith. Stay tuned for more of the Dr. Gina Show, live from the beach, right after this.
God, guns, and gear, the things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best t-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com, docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear. You understand your Second Amendment freedoms, but who is out there with a no-compromise attitude that will defend those Second Amendment rights? Well, I can tell you, gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org. This is Dr. Gina, and I want you to go to that website right now, gunowners.org, and let them know that you want to help them as they continue the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington, D.C., according to Ron Paul. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org. Check them out.
This is Fingers Malloy of FTRradio.com. Listen to the Dr. Gina Show, or the baby seal gets it.
And now I'm calling out your name, even if I lose the game, I'm on it tonight. Yeah, I'm on it for life.
And you are listening to the Dr. Gina Show. It's always fascinating, the difference a week makes. Astonishing, really. When I think about last week, the things we were talking about with Billy Hallowell, compared to this week and the crazy things going on. News happens so fast these days, and it's not even like it's a political year, and yet there's so much to cover that every day I have stacks and stacks of things I want to share with you that I just can't even get to. It didn't used to be that way. When I started in radio, I remember there'd be days where there was no news, and we think, what in the heck are we going to talk about today? But those days don't come anymore. We have so much news out there. Part of it's because there's a lot of citizen journalism and a lot more news we actually hear about, know about. We had never heard the whole thing about Acorn if James O'Keefe and Hannah Giles hadn't taken on that issue. So that was our first lesson in how we as normal citizens could make a lot of noise. And I think a lot of you have. Billy Hallowell is our week in faith wrap-up guy from The Blaze. Of course, you can find him there at The Blaze and follow his stuff because it is absolutely awesome. But he's also on Facebook and Twitter at Billy Hallowell. Welcome to the Dr. Gina Show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing well. Now, there is so much news breaking. First thing I want to do is get an update from you. I've been following this story about this Texas case that sounds an awful lot like the Gosnell case. Do you want to give us an update on any of that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And what's happening in Texas is that the doctor at the center of this scandal, which is apparently another Gosnell-like situation. This doctor, his name is Douglas Carpin. He's being accused by 3 former workers. In fact, there's actually 4 workers who are involved in this. 3 have actually come forward with their names, claiming that this doctor did things very similar to what happened at the Gosnell clinic. And I don't want to get too graphic, but some of the crimes, the alleged crimes, are even worse than what we heard at Gosnell. Yeah. And these women took pictures, they claimed to have evidence, and they came forward, and we actually have a video over on theblaze.com. You can see them speaking about what they saw happen in this clinic, and we're not going to show you the pictures on the Blaze, but you can actually click over and see them if you want. And I mean, I would just encourage people not to look at them because they're so horrible, but definitely read and educate yourself about it.
Yeah, and what do you make of this jury, this judge and jury deciding he gets life? How in the world does he get life after he has, given out so much death?
Yeah, he got 3 life sentences, which is always ironic because, I mean, the guy's already 72 years old, and he was probably going to die in prison either way. That's what a lot of people have argued because he was so advanced in age. But the interesting element of this, I guess, is that the reason they gave him life was because he promised not to appeal the case, which is sort of interesting because that's a big right to give up. If you really think that you're innocent and you give up your right to appeal and you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, it sort of makes you wonder if, it's an admission of sorts and sort of a white flag at the end. Okay, I've already lost the battle. But a lot of people are struggling with that notion that he's going to be able to sit in jail. And, another part of this is that he may have accepted that deal so that his kids didn't have to get on the stand. He has 6 kids of his own, and they potentially would have testified on his behalf to avoid the death penalty. So some have said he wanted to spare them that pain, apparently.
Wow, the plot thickens. Do you think this stops with the Gosnell case, the Delaware case, and the Texas case?
I got to tell you, I do not think so. I want to say this, and I think it's sort of a controversial statement to make, but let's say 90% of abortion clinics, 95% operate according to the law, meaning that people may disagree with abortion and think that it's completely wrong what goes on in these clinics, but that they follow the law and they don't do things like what Gosnell was doing. But even if only 5% of them or even 1% of them are doing things similar, then there's a big problem out there, and it needs to be examined, and we need to know what is happening. My personal thought is that this probably is much more rampant than what we realize.
and that's probably the reason why the pro-choice groups so wanted to bury this, and the pro-choice media outlets as well seem to want to bury this. I think ABC didn't cover it until like 59 days after the rest of us were all talking about the Gosnell case. They in fact didn't cover it, I don't think, until he was sentenced, did they?
Well, a lot of these outlets waited, and then even when they did cover it, and I wrote a story about this, and we may have even talked about it on the show, the New York Times referring to these babies that were killed after they were born, referring to them as fetuses.
Yes!
I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yes.
That's unbelievable.
How is that a fetus after it's born? I mean, they're going to argue that a 9-month baby in utero is a fetus, and I disagree with that. But to say once it's outside the womb is just completely insane. All right, well, I want to move on because there's so much in the news right now. We know about the patriot groups and the IRS situation there, the harassment and attacks on the patriot groups. But it looks like this goes far beyond patriot groups, doesn't it, Billy?
Yeah, it's really sort of fascinating to hear these stories and troubling. We actually had an exclusive story yesterday. We spoke with a professor, Dr. Ann Hendershot, and her story, she said, listen, I don't have concrete evidence, and let me just say that this is a sociologist who's well known in this country. This is not some fly-by-night. I mean, she's a well-known professor and a staunch Catholic who has gone out and spoken against Obama, and she claims she was audited in 2010 and that it was a very odd situation. And we have the whole story over on theblaze.com, and if you go to theblaze.com/faith, you'll see it at the top right of the page, and you can read about her tale and sort of what happened to her. I mean, it's a very odd scenario. She believes that it may be that the IRS saw that she was critiquing the Obama administration, critiquing health care, and somebody at the IRS went after her because of that. So it's again another troubling story. We also have another story about Franklin Graham claiming that his organization, two of them in fact, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association and the Samaritan's Purse, that they were gone after by the IRS last year as well. So it looks like it extends into some faith groups too.
Well, and if it extends into faith groups, I know the Christian Coalition is one who was mentioned. If it extends into faith groups, I think it's extending far beyond probably the 501c4s into the 501c3s and the 527s. And so this should get really, really interesting. But this morning I was hearing word that perhaps this extends even beyond the IRS, that there are other government agencies, some whistleblowers perhaps ready to come forward with other government agencies. Have you heard anything about that happening?
We've heard murmurs of a lot of these sorts of things where some other people are going to come forward. And it's one of those situations, too, where it's so hard as a journalist you see so much coming in, you have to vet it and go through it. And that's why some of the stories, like the one we did yesterday about the Catholic professor, we vetted that. We spoke with her. I mean, but I do think you're going to see a lot more on this. There's more to the story. And Obama may not be lying. Maybe he didn't know that this was happening, but somebody knew that this was happening, obviously. And who knows how far that goes up. And I think that there are going to be stories coming out, whistleblowers coming out, and if there are other agencies, and let's not forget you have the Associated Press scandal going on too, with the Department of Justice. I mean, this is concerning, regardless of what party people are in, that this sort of stuff is happening in a country with a First Amendment that protects the rights of individuals and protects the rights of the press. These are big issues. It wouldn't matter if it was a Republican or a Democrat that we need to be examining and looking at.
All right, Billy, and I want to ask you, too, the Gallup poll last week, you did a post on this at theblaze.com, the Gallup poll that came out highlighting citizens' views, Americans with no religion and their views on abortion, plus are women really pro-choice? The answers to those questions are really interesting. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. Let's start with women, because I think that is, when you listen to a lot of people on the left and a lot of the pro-choice movement, you sort of hear, it seems like, so there's a war on women, that this notion that women overwhelmingly support abortion. Well, when you look at the labels of pro-choice and pro-life, that's not the case at all. In fact, when you break those numbers down, 46% of women call themselves pro-life, and 47% call themselves pro-choice. That's virtually tied in this country, which means that just like the country on abortion, women, when it comes to the label of whether they're pro-choice or pro-life, are also split right down the middle. So that's a fascinating, I think, statistic that hasn't gotten a lot of play. And then the non-religious. So if you do not have a religion, and I think this is really startling, 80% are pro-choice. So 80% of Americans who are unreligious would support abortion rights. So that, I expect it to be more than half, the 80%. I mean, that's the cohort that is the most supportive of pro-choice.
All right, and a couple other stories I want to get to. The bizarre. I love when you guys do these bizarre stories because it's fascinating. This is one that you just have to wonder, if you're traveling from Saudi Arabia and you're missing a page in your passport, maybe you don't bring a pressure cooker with you. Is there any follow-up on that story?
We have actually not done a follow-up on the story yet, but it's so odd. I mean, the initial details that this guy gets to the airport and he goes up to the border agent, and they find this pressure cooker in his bag. And the issue with the story was that his personal story about why he brought the pressure cooker kept changing. So that's why it was so odd. He said, "Oh, well, I brought it for my nephew because they don't make pressure cookers in America." Well, that's not true. So
has he read the news lately?
Flagged.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but yeah, that's actually a good reminder. We got to do a follow-up on that because I think people were really interested in sort of who is this guy? Why was he here? And, there really hasn't been a lot of media about him after the fact. And even that story didn't get a lot of play. So we saw it and we thought we better bring this out for people to get a chance to see.
Well, it's probably because of this, all the news breaking with the IRS and Benghazi and there's so many other things in the news that are so paramount. Of course, the AP story and all of that. Do you think that? What credence do you give to Michelle Bachmann's theory that the IRS story was divulged only as a distraction, or mostly as a distraction from the impeachable Benghazi story? I'm just curious to get your personal take on that. I don't know if you've written about it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I think I'm always cautious to say, I agree, or I think that's the case. I think it's a legitimate point to make that is possible. I mean, on the flip side, it may have been that the government said, listen, this is going to get out and it's going to be another scandal, and it'll be an even bigger scandal if we don't, come forward ourselves with it. So let's try to make it look like, and I think that a lot of times this happens, let's make it look like we were being open and honest and we found this, so we came out with it instead of somebody exposing it. It may have been a little bit of both. Who knows? Maybe it's sort of theory and the fact that they wanted to protect themselves. But I think when you have a scandal, if you're the one who breaks the news about it, it's still a scandal, but it looks a little less pronounced because you discovered it yourself. So I think that is at the core of it. But her point, listen, it could entirely be true and possible that that's what's happening.
Well, it certainly has taken over the news cycle in ways that I think make it even more a suspicious possibility. One more bizarre story I want to get to before I let you go. The bizarre reason a Texas pastor is on trial. Where do you find this stuff, Billy?
This story is so, I'm always scouring for fun and interesting stories. And so, this one sort of came through. And
I want to hear this. Came through a tip, came through an internet search. It doesn't just come down from heaven, Billy. Where did this story come from?
Well, actually, this one I found. I do, I have hundreds of websites that I have in an RSS reader that I'm constantly going through and looking for faith stories. And I also get tips. This one was not sent to me as a tip. This one I found in a local outlet, KHOU. And this pastor's been in trouble for over a year, but his trial has just started. He's accused of animal abuse. It's such a bizarre story, but basically the allegation is that he trapped a cat in his yard, and he put the cat in his truck and forgot about the cat. It was in a cage. And then at some point, apparently, he went to turn the cat in and found out it was his neighbor's. Long story short, authorities found the cat under a bridge, and the allegation, and I'm not laughing because it's funny, it's just such a bizarre story.
It's so bizarre,
He threw the cat off of the bridge, allegedly, And
he must not have had a lot of cats in his time, because he might have known that cats will often land on their feet, depending on the height of the bridge, I guess.
Exactly. Well, in this case, I don't know what happened. I mean, who knows? This theory may not even be true, but he was found near the bridge. So the allegations that he threw the cat off the bridge, so the cat died.
Oh, it did die. Oh, that is sad.
It did. It did die. So that part's really sad. And the family is suing him. And then he also has these legal charges against him over this, too. So we're going to be monitoring that story to see what ends up happening. And in fact, today they're in court again. So we'll have an update. But such a weird story.
And that's really sad. I mean, a family's cat. I mean, that is just a whole different thing.
Yeah.
That the cat died. I missed that part of it somehow. But there is a story, an amazing story that I just always feel urged to bring up when I hear a story about a beloved pet like that. There's a senator from Missouri. If you haven't heard of Old Drum, you should look it up. And I happen to know this as a native Missourian, and it's a senator's testimony about his dog, Old Drum, that was in fact killed by a neighbor. And it's the most amazing court testimony about an animal I've ever read. Worth the read. Old Drum is the name of it. All right, well, I just appreciate your weekend wrap from theblaze.com, Billy. Anything else you should know about, you see on the horizon, we should be warned about?
Yes, this other story, and it's our front carousel right now on theblaze.com, this guy who gave his girlfriend an abortion drug, and she didn't realize it was happening, and she ended up miscarrying. It's going to be it's been our biggest story all day, and I think it's another one of these cultural stories that we want to be on top of, and I'd encourage people to check that one out as well.
It's really interesting to think about that. I'm not going to lie, as the wife of a politician who was pregnant through I think all of his, I have 5 children, so through all of his political career, I have to tell you that political opponents from time to time, I would think about if I set a drink down, and I would worry about that very factor. So the fact that this can be done and you can not know it is one of the most horrific thoughts you can have. And if it's happened then, how many other times has it happened? So I'm glad you're on top of that. Billy Hallowell from The Blaze, tell everybody how they can find you.
Go to Twitter. It's Billy Hallowell, and I'm on Twitter all the time, just like you are. I love it. And also go to theblaze.com and read our stories. We do 70 to 100 stories a day, so there's a lot to read there.
It makes me tired just thinking about it. Billy Hallowell from The Blaze, thanks so much for being on the Dr. Gina Show this Theo Thursday.
Thanks for having me.
All right, my friend, you take care. Coming up, the latest in science. Our text section is going to tell you why your political motivations may have links to how much of a man you are. Stay tuned for more on the Dr. Gina Show this Theo Thursday, right after this.
Confessions of a Potentially Perfect Parent, brought to you by AdoptUsKids.org.
I know more about cooking dinner for a party of 12 than about packing a lunch for a 12-year-old. I know kids like things like fish sticks. Fillets, I get, but sticks? Maybe we can just compromise on mac and cheese. Can you make that with Brie?
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who would love to put up with you. Call 1-888-200-4005 or visit AdoptUsKids.org for more information. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt Us Kids, and the Ad Council.
God, guns, and gear. The things you need to be a proper conservative these days. Go to the Dr. Gina site at docgtv.com. That's docgtv.com for all of your Patriot gear, including concealed carry handbags, the best t-shirts you'll find anywhere, and even jewelry for that special woman in your life who enjoys her freedoms as well. docgtv.com, docgtv.com. Go there for your Patriot gear.
Would you rather be a gun owner or a victim? Hi, I'm Tim Macy from Gun Owners of America. Our Constitution affirms our right to self-defense, including the right to own firearms. Right now in Washington, D.C. and many states around the country, there are radical leftists who'd like to disarm Americans. That's why Gun Owners of America was formed over 35 years ago. We're here for only 2 reasons: to lobby to protect the Second Amendment and to replace anti-gun politicians with pro-gun Americans who actually understand what the Constitution says. I urge you to join us in this fight. We've been called the only no-compromise pro-gun lobby in Washington, D.C. Please go to gunowners.org and join today. It may help you from becoming a victim tomorrow. That's gunowners.org.
Hey, it's Dr. Gina here, and I told you that I'm going to help you be the most effective in your activism that I possibly can, and I've got a tip for you right now. Go to gunowners.org and join to be a member. Sign up for their alerts, and you can know exactly what you need to do to take action to save your freedoms. Go there right now and become a member. Gunowners.org. That's gunowners.org. Tell them Dr. Gina sent you. Gunowners.org.
Hi, this is Mark Stein, author of After America, and even in the midst of total societal collapse, you don't want to miss the Dr. Gina Show. She's great.
Well, and you are listening to the Dr. Gina Show. Thanks for being with us this Theological Thursday. What a great lineup today. We have a very special breaking announcement. This is an actual fact.
Breaking news on the Dr. Gina Show.
Okay, the IRS softball game has been canceled with the GOP. The IRS team has canceled their softball game with the GOP.
Wait, is that a story from The Onion?
You know, I don't know where it's from, but it's a credible enough person who tipped me on it that I know it's true. I don't have the link in front of me, and I wouldn't have really a way to look it up right now anyway. But yeah, you just have to shake your head. Like when this becomes funny, you just have to go, is this really happening in our world today?
It's actually posted on the Blaze.
Oh, it's on the Blaze. Well, Billy Fail. Billy Fail. Yeah, it's canceled. And my understanding is, and perhaps you can tell me more than I know, Jason, but my understanding is that it was the IRS that canceled on the GOP, not the reverse. I don't know. And if you can confirm that on this very important breaking news regarding the cancellation of the softball game between the IRS. It takes me back because I remember when my husband would play softball against the unions, and that was always fascinating, those games. And I would always go over to the union side and ask them for a T-shirt, and I have some union T-shirts.
You have your SEIU T-shirt?
Yeah, I do. You think I'm kidding? I have my own Purple People Eater shirt.
Purple People Beater,
yes, I
that's
do.
awesome.
All right, now, you are a conservative, Jason, and I'm concerned to divulge this next story with you having a mic over there. So if you just kindly shut your mic off and go investigate whether or not the GOP or the IRS is the one who was responsible for canceling that softball game, I would be very thankful to you.
Okay, I'm turning my mic off right now.
Picture Arnold. Picture Ronald. Picture J.C. Watts. I'll just go ahead and say, picture hubby Senator John Loudon. Men who are physically strong are more likely to take a right-wing political stance.
Oh, yeah.
The funny thing is, a friend of mine from Newsmax posted this on my Facebook page, and you're just like, what are you saying here? While weaker men are inclined to support the welfare state. This is according to a new study. eScience News reports. Also, Daily Mail is reporting that researchers, I'll be able to talk in a minute, discovered political motivations that may have evolutionary links to physical strength. Man's upper body strength predicts their political opinions on economic redistribution, according to the research. The principal investigators, psychological scientists Michael Bang-Peterson of IRS University in Denmark, and also Daniel Sneisser of the University of California in the United States, believe that the link may reflect psychological traits that evolved. This is great when the evolutionists pit themselves against the liberals. This is Thursday. This is Theo Thursday poetry for Gina. Loving it. So it says that they believe this is based on early ancestral environments and continues to influence our behaviors today. Things like weaker men are more likely to support welfare and wealth redistribution. Maybe that's because they don't have the courage to think they can actually go out there and be a producer, be a maker. I didn't say producer. I said maker. This link may reflect psychological traits that date way back to men who were insecure about their ability to make money versus those who were not insecure about it, being stronger, better hunter-gatherer types, the types that we conservative women love to love. Strength was a proxy for an ability to defend or acquire resources, but they did not find the same links in women's physical strengths and political views. I'm going to have to hear about this story for the rest of the day now. Thank you so much for being with us today on this Theo Thursday here on the Dr. Gina Show. Life does start here. I'm going to the beach. You go boldly now and live the truth.